The history of any country is always bound with unrevealed secrets, sacred places and riddles which scientists have been trying to solve for decades. Kazakhstan is an ancient land. Its history keeps a lot of glorious names, events and facts, some of which are still covered with myths and legends. The Time Puzzle crew tries to understand the intricacies of ancient and modern mysteries of history, traveling around the country and visiting its most amazing corners. In this episode, Karaganda, the most interesting details of the history of the Kazakh coal capital. Only 100 years ago, there was no such city on the world map. And today, it is one of the largest industrial centers of the coal mining of the Eurasian continent. It is known not only in the entire post-Soviet area, but also around the world. In the Soviet era, there was the notorious Karlag labor camp. The world boxing champion Gennady Golovkin was born here. A song was written about this city. Karaganda is one of the youngest, but at the same time one of the richest cities in terms of history. It will just suffice to mention a legend about how the coal was found here. How did a small settlement grow to one of the largest cities in the country? And what other secrets can you learn about Karaganda if you get to know it better? It is well known that the city is quite young, created in the 30s. But now I would like to mention that the history of the creation of the city is more than 100 years old. How was the contest between French, English and Russian coal mining companies going on in this region in the late 19th century? After they got Karaganda-Basi area, they started to mine coal in Karaganda. During 1856 years, about 30 small coal mines were discovered. Tragic pages in the history of the city. The history of Karaganda is not only the coal mining and the development of metallurgy, but also the notorious Karlag. The most complete and little known truth about the city of miners. Watch right now. The city was founded not so long ago, in the early 20th century. By historical standards, it is quite young. My name is Andrei Slozhin. You are watching the Time Puzzle. I'm in Karaganda, and I'm sure there are many interesting stories and mysteries waiting for us here. Karaganda is located in central Kazakhstan. It is an industrial city and a major scientific and economic center of the country. By area, the city occupies 550 square kilometers and is considered the fourth largest city in the country, trailing only Shymkent, Astana and Almaty. According to historical data, Karaganda received the status of the city on February the 10th, 1934. However, people lived and worked here long before that date. Moreover, the events that occurred here influenced the geopolitics of not only this region, but the whole world. There is a very popular legend about how coal was discovered here. However, this is a historical fact with a lot of curious nuances. It all started with the fact that the young shepherd discovered strange black stones. A senior researcher of the Karaganda Regional Museum of Local Law, Gulmira Konakpaeva, told us about it. As far back as in the 19th century, there was nothing, only a wide steppe, where Karaganda is now located. There is a local beautiful legend that in 1833, the boy shepherd Apak Baizhanov found a black stone to the south of the river Nura. He did not know what to do with that stone and threw it into the fire, and the stone burned with blue flame. So the boy became the first discoverer of Karaganda coal. Apak Baizhanov was born in 1824 near the Nura River in the Karaganda district. At that time, there was a summer nomad camp of local Bais, Iglik and Juman. Apak was their shepherd. One story is that one day, the guy drove away the bison flock, and near the marmot barrow he found black stones which looked like nothing he saw before. Hearing from their parents that the land on which they live is very rich in various jewels, the guy took several black shiny stones. In the evening, near the fire, he showed them to the elders of the village. The elders disappointed the guy. It was not gold or silver. Then the guy threw the stones into the fire out of desperation. After a while, all people sitting at the fire saw that the stones began to burn. The next morning, the whole village knew about the guy's discovery. And later, a Russian merchant found out about it. In 1856, on March the 14th, the Russian merchant Nikon Ushakov bought the terrain of Karaganda-Basi from a local buyer Iglik Utepov, and an act was signed for the sale of Karaganda for 250 rubles in silver. These dates are the official history of the beginning of the coal mining in this region. However, very few people wondered how the merchant appeared in the steppe area where there were no large owls. To uncover the secret, it is necessary to find out who Nikon Ushakov really was. According to archival data, he was not just a merchant, but a person who had an eye for mining business. At the end of the 19th century, there really was a huge number of merchants from different countries in Kazakhstan. Nikon Ushakov was no exception. He was engaged in buying and reselling cattle from the local population. However, approximately in the 30s, he gave up on everything and began to look for minerals. At that time, many wealthy merchants were in the midst of the gold rush. They were looking for everything: copper, iron ore, gold, deposits of silver. Being fluent in the Kazakh language, he asked the local residents where such deposits could be located. By 1846, Nikon received the long-awaited permission from the chief of the Altai plants to find and develop gold-bearing places and various ores in western Siberia and the Kyrgyz districts. This fact is told by the historian, editor of the internet portal History of Kazakhstan, Arman Suleymanov. In 1847, Ushakov purchased it and began to mine copper. Then, after some time, he sold it to the British. A joint venture was created between the British and French joint stock company Spassky Copper Ore. From 1856 to 1866, about 30 small mines were discovered. It is not known for certain why Ushakov sold his mines. However, historians have a version of why this happened. According to the rules for raw mining and other minerals of that time, the miner had to mine at least 10,000 poods of ore per year, which is approximately 163 tons. Otherwise, the mine was considered unprofitable and the owner lost his rights to it. It is known that Ushakov had several mines, but the coal wasn't mined in each of them. Perhaps this led to bankruptcy and forced him to sell his mines, although Ushakov got much more money than he spent for the purchase. The former miner and now the master of industrial training, Vladimir Lando, told us about it. But soon he went bankrupt, and after that, these deposits were bought for 766,000 Tsarist money in rubles by Jacques Carnot, the son of the French president. This happened in 1904. The son of the former French president, Jean Carnot, having used all the connections received during his father's reign, received the permission to own these mines. Few people know, but these transactions were illegal at that time, since it was forbidden to have property in the steppe region to foreign citizens. According to historians, Nikolai II went to such a gross violation of the law either because he wanted to get France and England into the Allies before the upcoming First World War, or because Carnot's connections and persuasiveness were brilliant. The archives preserved the decree of His Imperial Majesty, which says, The highest authorized order allows K.E. Kano to acquire for immediate use and then in ownership the Spassky copper smelting plant, copper mines and coal mines of Saransk and Karaganda. I interviewed Colin Brown, the ambassador of the United Kingdom in Kazakhstan, and she told that indeed the Great Britain repeatedly sent its researchers to the steppes of Kazakhstan, and generally they knew for a long time that the bowels of Kazakhstan are rich in minerals. Indeed, after only 3 years, Kano resells coal mines to the British. The development of these mines led to the fact that the British decided to build the plant for processing. At the beginning of the 20th century, English young engineers were sent from London to Atbasar and then to the Spassky copper ores. They brought with them all the equipment, which was considered modern at that time, and they built and installed the plant. There is a version that Kano did not sell coal mines in 1907, but became a shareholder. To be precise, he was vice president of the newly established enterprise where Sir Arthur Fell, a member of the British Parliament, was elected chairman. The head was the brother of Arthur Fell, Nelson. He arrived in this region with his wife and children. By the way, very few people know, but a coal layer was named in honor of Nelson Fell's daughter, and it is still known all over the world. He discovered this coal, and at that time his daughter was born and he called her Marian, and that's why he called the layer the Upper Marian. With the arrival of Bolsheviks and Soviet power in the region, all coal mines and the plant were nationalized. After the Bolsheviks announced the nationalization of their mines and factories, of course they were upset and began to pack their bags. There was a revolution, and they were allowed to continue their activities. They restored everything, the plant, the mines. They continued to set up production. This lasted until 1918-1919. At the end of 1919, again the Red Army came to the region. The Bolsheviks took the power into their own hands. And with the withdrawal of the troops of Kolchak, they took all their documentation and valuables and went to China. Through China, Vladivostok, and by the sea, they returned to London. A new stage began in the history of the region and the city. In the steppe, the all-union construction was expanding where volunteers from all over the vast country arrived. In 1920, the Geological Committee of the highest national economy sent a geological expedition to Karaganda under the guidance of the professor, the scientist-geologist Alexander Gopeyev. The expedition revealed large reserves of coal in Karaganda. Alexander Gopeyev made a geological map. He determined the coal deposit. The area of the coal field was determined to be 300 square kilometers. And he also revealed coal reserves of 4 billion tons. In 1929, the reconnaissance work continued. A group of geologists from the Leningrad and Moscow geological departments arrived here. The State Archive of the Karaganda region has a lot of documents relating to this period. According to them, the creation of the city and the development of the region began in 1929. Here the Karaganda Ugol Trust was organized. June 2nd, 1929, the resolution on the development of non-ferrous metallurgy in Kazakhstan was adopted. In the same year, the Soviet geologist, academician of the Academy of Sciences of the Kazakh SSR, Mikhail Rusakov, proved that the local reserves of copper ore exceed all known in the entire Soviet space. In 1929, in order to accelerate the construction of industrial enterprises in central Kazakhstan, the Kazakh Stroy Department was organized. And in the 1930s, this administration was reorganized into Karaganda Coal Trust. Thousands of workers came to the region. First they live in tents and dugouts. Materials for the construction of houses, factories and mines were delivered by camels. The archives of the city have descriptions of that time. The head of department for use and publication of documents of Karaganda Region State Archives, Olga Berkun, told us about it. We also have such interesting documents. The memories of those who came here and saw the city for the first time. That is very interesting. For example, memories of people from Donbass who came here to build the city. They write that they went to the station to buy tickets to Karaganda, and they didn't know where the Karaganda is, what it is. And they were told, well, you'd better buy tickets to Moscow. And there in Moscow they certainly know what Karaganda is. But they knew that it's warm and hot there, and all happened in November. They left their boots, warm clothes in Donbass. They flew to Moscow. From Moscow they bought a train ticket to Karaganda. They came to Karaganda, and it was so cold here, and of course they were horrified. They didn't understand what was going on. And when they were arriving here, they said that we rode horses, and we looked under our feet. It was already late. The ground burned under our feet. We thought, well, probably it is the coal burning. And the next day they were told that they saw dugouts. That is, they rode along the roofs of the dugouts. People in those dugouts turned kerosene lamps on, and they were shining through. But not only specialists from Ukraine came here. Volunteers came from all over the country. Having worked a shift in the mines, people started building houses and laying roads. In addition to the workers, teachers also came to the coal province. The first teachers came here in 1928, but they interestingly described that they traveled from Akmola to Karaganda for 5 days, on horses, with bells. And when they finally got there, they got to the Big Mikhailovka. And Big Mikhailovka, when they saw it, there were white houses, which were so clean, it looked like as if we were somewhere in the Ukrainian village, because the immigrants from Ukraine lived there. It is worth mentioning that by the beginning of the 1931, a large number of well-to-do peasants were exiled to Karaganda, as they were then called kulaks, from other regions of the country. Thus, in the middle of 1932, in Karaganda, there were about 70,000 immigrants. All these people had to live somewhere. When the construction began, the settlements appeared spontaneously. Buildings appeared spontaneously near each mine. When they began to build more decent houses, it was determined that for each person it was necessary to allocate not more than 2 square meters. Well, imagine what it is. 2 square meters, well, it's the size of a bed. Then in the future, this figure rose to 5 square meters per person. This district is known all over the world, thanks to the man who paved the way to glory with his fists, Gennady Golovkin. We are in Maykuduk now. Maykuduk, Novaya Tikhonovka and Prishakhtinsk. These districts of Karaganda appeared only in 1930. In general, the issues of the city development were not solved as simply as they wanted. They argued a lot. How should they build Karaganda after all? We need to build it far from the mines, in such blocks, so that there were houses, there were different infrastructure, gardens, schools and shops. There should be such a complex. Well, it seems that either means or opportunities. They had to build it quickly, so they started to build from the railways, from the railway to the mines. A goal was set before the city planners to make the city convenient for work and living. The master plan was developed under the guidance of the famous architect and town planner Alexander Kuznetsov. By 1934, the city was built up. There were already more than 100,000 people. Anyone who has ever been to Karaganda probably noticed that the city consists of districts that are distant from each other. It is hard to walk from one to another. Now in the modern city, Karaganda residents have no problems with moving from one district to another. There are shuttle buses, taxi. Many have their own personal transport. And in the pre-war time, everything was different. There was no actual transport. But there are some interesting facts. There were no cars and most of people rode bicycles. A horse and a bicycle were the main kinds of transport. Later, somewhere in 1938, cars appeared. And it is interesting, in the newspaper Industrial Karaganda, or in Sots Karaganda, there is an article that tells about traffic regulations. Because there were too many accidents on the streets. That is, new traffic regulations were introduced because there were accidents. There were 5 cars in the city. The city developed at a rapid pace. By 1940, it had become an industrial center with more than 165,000 inhabitants. But the Second World War began. Thousands of Karaganda residents went to the front. Plants and factories were evacuated here. Work in the mines did not stop. During the war, the Karaganda coal basin became the second stockhold of the country. Mines were built. 42,772,000 tons of coal were mined. During the war, the women worked in the mines. For example, more than 223 women worked in the mine number 31. During World War II, 245,000 women worked in the coal mines throughout the country, 86% of the miners of the whole Union. There was a movement, Girls to the Mines. The main coal mining was carried out in Donbass and Karaganda. In 39 Karaganda mines, 43,000 people worked for the sake of the victory, 12,000 of which were women. Working in mines can be difficult and dangerous even for men. And for women, it can be 3 times more difficult, or even more than that. But our heroic women stood this time. They worked. Later, when the war was over, a resolution of the Council of Ministers of the USSR on measures to replace women's labor in underground work in the mining industry and in the construction of underground structures was issued. In the 50s, Yekaterina Furtseva was the Minister of Culture. In 1956, she brought all the women out of the mines. Well, in fact, the work of women miners is very hard. After all, they are women, mothers. This must be taken into account. Maybe it was even the right thing to do. But some women miners were upset because some of them were close to the retirement. Basically, there were some benefits for women miners. Despite the fact that the decree was issued in 1957, the rise to the surface was quite long. Only in 1966, women were completely withdrawn from underground work. Not only women worked for the benefit of the country in Karaganda. The entire population of the USSR tried to do good. There were various labor movements, such as, for example, Stakhanov movement. Alexei Stakhanov exceeded his one-day rate several times, and the Stakhanov movement began among the workers. In this regard, coal mining began to grow. Indeed, at that time, not only the production of coal, but also machine building and equipment for the front, all workers tried to work hard. But as the Karaganda people themselves say, their whole life is connected with coal and mines. It is difficult to find a family in the city in which there were no miners. If we talk about Karaganda region, well, probably each family is from the miners' clan. I am the same. My father worked for 38 years in the mine. He is also a war veteran. After the war in 1945, he came here and he took part in rebuilding the mines, and he worked here until his retirement and even after retirement. Such minor dynasties were often formed of those who were once exiled to this region, but high-level specialists also came here, as for example, the designer of coal combines, Semyon Makarov. During the Great Patriotic War, in order to facilitate the work of miners, For the purpose of new mechanization, mechanic of mine number 31, Semyon Makarov, created a mining combine. In 1944, the combine passed the test, and in 1945, mass production began. For his work, Semyon Makarov became the laureate of state awards of the Soviet Union. In general, Karaganda has set many world records for coal mining. For example, in the museum mine of the city of Karaganda, there is a coal combine, Karaganda 7.15, which became known to the whole world. A world record was set on this combine by shaft miners. It was in the 60s. They have passed 2,540 running meters in 1 month. It was a world record. Telling the history of the city, we couldn't fail to mention the specifics of the work of miners. It is a difficult work, but it has its subtleties and professional language. The miners never say to go up to the surface. They prefer the phrase to climb to the top or simply to the top. In addition, if you're afraid of something or in doubts, then in no case should you go down into the mine. The film crew of the Time Puzzle are fearless people, and they, of course, did not miss the opportunity to visit the mine. Despite the fact that the mine is educational, all mining machinery here is real. Modern miners now work under these conditions, although everything was different 100 years ago. The greatest danger for people in the mine is not a collapse but gas methane. It has no color, no smell, and is toxic to humans. Now miners have different instruments that allow to determine the presence of gas. In the past, miners used other methods to find out whether there is methane in the mine. There were such gas lamos, which by the height of the wick, by the height of the flame of the wick, determined the concentration of methane and carbon dioxide. There were special calculation methods, and also there were lamps that served to illuminate mine workings in the mine. The history of Karaganda is not only the coal mining and the development of metallurgy, but also the notorious Karlag. The intelligentsia from all over the Union was exiled here. Artists, scientists, including physicians. We all remember Doctor's plot. In general, many representatives of the intelligentsia, science and art were exiled to the Karaganda corrective labor camp. They lived in barracks, which were literally next door to the homes of ordinary workers. According to historical information, the prisoners of Karlag made a great contribution to the development of this region. In 1931, near Karaganda, 45 kilometers from the city, in the village of Dolinskoye, Karaganda camp, Karlag was located. The camp was formed by the decree of Stalin. It was like a state within the state, because there was its own administration, economic management. They submitted directly to Moscow. The city of Karaganda has a close connection with this camp Karlag, because the construction of the city, the production, and a number of institutions, all of them used the free labor of the prisoners of this camp. Therefore, we can say that Karlag contributed a lot to the history of the city of Karaganda. They are inseparable. One of the famous prisoners of the Karlag was Leonid Chizhevsky, a Soviet scientist, a biophysicist, the founder of heliobiology. Chizhevsky was an honorary member of 30 universities, academies, and scientific societies around the world. In 1939, he was elected honorary president of the International Congress on Biophysics and Biocosmology in New York. In 1942, Professor Chizhevsky was sentenced to 8 years of hard labor in Karlag under Article 58, Clause 10. It is not known for certain how the scientist managed to convince the camp's leadership, but in Karlag he had his own office where he continued his scientific activity. Alexander Leonidovich Chizhevsky did a lot of time in Karlag. he perfected his scientific works, invented a lamp for the ionization of air. Now this device is called a Chizhevsky lamp. When the miners descend into the mine, they gather in the rooms, take the ionization lamps and rest, take a break, strengthen their health. Chizhevsky was released in January 1950, but he was immediately sent to a settlement in Karaganda. In June 1954, he was also released from the settlement. Alexander Leonidovich continued to live in Karaganda for some time. He also conducted his research on air ion and on the structural analysis of moving blood, over which the scientist began working in Karlag. Chizhevsky returned to Moscow in 1958. In 1962, he was partially rehabilitated. He was rehabilitated completely only after his death. The scientist died in 1964. Walking around Karaganda, sometimes I feel like I was transported to the Soviet past by a time machine. Nuken Abdirov Avenue, Square of Peace, Lenin Avenue. All these buildings were built in those days. Everyone knows how the city grew and developed in the 60s. They built mostly houses of Khrushchev type. There are a lot of Soviet Khrushchev's houses. In this regard, in the 60s, the city began to develop. Industry, education, several colleges, polytechnic and medical colleges were opened. All this has brought a new wave for the development of the city. Simultaneously with its social status, the industrial potential of the city increased. In 1978, 1 billion tons of Karaganda coal was mined. 22 miners were awarded the title Hero of Socialist Labor. New houses were built actively, and not only houses, there were schools, kindergartens and hospitals. In 1980, the construction of a new micro-district was started. Now let's look at the development of the city in the 70s and 80s. In these years, the population has grown. New projects of the city have appeared. Not only this center began to grow, but a new Southeast district appeared. In the 80s, the construction of monolithic houses began. Modern Karaganda is a pretty sporting city. There are a lot of specialized schools and sections. Boxing, Sambo, the famous Karaganda football team Shakhtar. In the Soviet era, there were lots of champions from the coal capital of Kazakhstan. The pride of the city of Karaganda is the 1980 Olympic champion Vladimir Muravyov. He is a graduate of Karaganda State University, Soviet athlete. Since the days of his glory in track and field athletics and other sports, the names of several Karaganda athletes can be called with pride. One of them is our famous Gennady Golovkin. He was born in Mykuduk district, in the 14th district. His first coach was Galim Kenjibayev. As an athlete, he was trained here in the Karaganda region, in a sports school. Now in Mykuduk district, there is a sports center named after Golovkin. He also built there a small sports complex. The most important brand of Karaganda is Gennady Golovkin. Few people know, but in Karaganda a lot of famous personalities were born. For example, the first Kazakh cosmonaut, Tokhtar Aubakirov, Russian actor Vladimir Steklov, the first president of Chechnya, Akhmat Kadyrov. Karaganda is now supplying the whole country with coal, thanks to which every house of the Kazakh family is light and warm. Karaganda, a harsh city of miners and metallurgists, turned out to be hospitable, friendly and sympathetic. Here you feel like home. My name is Andrei Slozhin. It was the time puzzle. See you.